The Art and Science of Success. Hi, it's Dianne here with Chad Burmeister, an expert in success in many different areas of life and business. And I met Chad through the most interesting way. I was on LinkedIn, and believe it or not, a virtual assistant that was all AI connected to me, but I didn't know it was AI. And then I said, well, you can be on the show if you talk to me first. And then when we spoke, I'm like, oh my God, he's perfect. So be really excited to hear the wisdom from this man, because even in our short conversation prior to today, I was so excited and thrilled. And so the magic of technology sometimes can really bring people together who otherwise wouldn't know each other. So, because I know very little about that technology, Chad knows a lot about that technology. So we're going to talk about the art and science of business. So welcome, Chad, to the show. And someone gets me. I'm so happy that we're here together.
Thank you so much for having me. We have something in common too, because your last name is Allen and my middle name is Allen.
So there we go. See, there's a synergy already.
That's right.
Oh yes, and you appreciate music in the way I do too. So that's really good.
I have two guitars hanging on my wall, but you wouldn't know it with the virtual green screen that I use here. So just imagine two nice guitars, one signed by Mike Ness from Social Distortion, which is a band you probably have not heard. And then another is signed from about 10 different artists at a show that I went to in Vegas, rock show. And I went maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and all of the singers and guitarists and bass players and everything else signed it. So it's pretty cool.
Beautiful. Oh, that's wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming to the show, because we're all about helping people get unstuck and live their vision. And after speaking to you, I thought, oh, well, this is a man that can really inspire people, especially the people who feel a little stuck. So the first question that I would like to ask, because we all know I do it on intuition, so there's no script here. The first question I would like to ask you about, though, is what interested you in bringing spiritual principles into your business? How did that start? Because that's typically not a marriage.
Right. Well, since I was a young kid, my parents always took me to church, to the point where you wake up on Sunday and it was, really? I don't feel good, Mom. I've got a sore throat right now. and and then later that day you're out playing in the driveway riding your bike, and they figured that story out really quickly. So early it was, hey, this is just a thing we do, right? My parents went, your grandparents went, and your grandparents before them went to church on Sundays. And so, but I learned the Bible stories and Jesus loves me, and I got my cross in 8th grade from my grandparents through confirmation. And then I go off to college, and, I would go to church. I'd actually seek it out a few times here and there through college, but I wasn't a regular Sunday goer. Mm-hmm. And over the years, when you run into critical and tough situations, the one thing that was constant was that if I would pray about anything, my confirmation class, I remember the Pastor Hinchy, said, "Your will be done." And so that was always my prayer. I would just say, God, I don't know. This is way over my head. It's over my pay grade. Right. All I can ask at this moment is your will be done. So I'd go to bed at night and I'd pray, your will be done. I tell you, beyond a reasonable doubt, I would get dreams that would be almost parables. And you'd wake up in the morning and go, got it. Thanks. We got this. And so that's literally how I've lived my life, especially when times get hard. When I was fired from my first sales job out of college, and I thought I was going to be a seller for my entire life, and I'm fired 9 months into the job. God, your will be done. And guess what? The next job, I became the #1 sales rep in the company within 6 months. Right manager, right place, right time. I built some friendships that lasted my entire life. And without that spark and that prayer, your will be done, none of it would have happened as it was meant to be. So that's why I brought it into my company, because it's worked for me. And so I'm not out there trumpeting on the corners, hey, you need to follow God and you need to. However, I make it known in the way that I run my business, the way that I've managed teams in the past.
Mhm.
And that's why I brought God into my company and in everywhere I've worked since graduating college.
Oh, that's wonderful. So, tell me about the inspiration to go from being a salesperson or employee into a business owner? Because those are completely different in so many ways. And I'm always curious about that story. Like, what made you want to own a business?
I heard a speaker this morning on Inc. 5000, and she was one of the keynotes of the day. And she's a CEO of a pharmaceutical company, and then she runs another private equity investment company. And she said the question she asks of other entrepreneurs that she's looking to invest in is, how did you first make money in life? Not how did you make money at a job or what was your first job? How did you first make money? So the answer to me would be, well, when I was 10 or 12 years old, I bought 144 suckers, a gross is what it was called, right? I learned
Right.
that terminology from a Sam's Club or something like that. And you'd spend $5 or $6 on 144 of these things. I'd bring them onto the bus. I'd sell them for 25 cents each. When you get down to the last 2 to 3, now the law of scarcity kicks in. Oh, I've only got 3 left. These are now $1. And so I knew I was a salesperson when I was very young. And then I knew I was competitive because I would do the rope climb in elementary school,
Mhm.
first through sixth grade. And I was like, wow, I beat everyone. And I'm not like a super athletic kid. I didn't have huge muscles or anything. I was just keen on winning.
Right.
So you couple that sales mentality and the keen on winning. That's how I first got into sales. And then entrepreneurship, I was always that kid in elementary and high school where I'd say, "Hey, come on over. Let's do the boxing fight for the night, right?" Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson. I remember that 1 and 2,
Hmm.
or the one where someone jumped in Vegas and landed in the ring. But I'd always have people to the house, and so I knew that there was something about being able to corral a group of individuals
Mm.
into doing things that I wanted them to do. and and it was fun and I enjoy it, and there's just that feeling of seeing somebody go from a entry level rep to a manager or VP themselves just multiple times where they'll call me or they'll send me an email and say, Chad, thank you so much for your help early in my career. And those are the things that get me most excited.
That's so cool. So, obviously, you're a connector,
Big
and
time.
you believe in the power of connection, obviously, because what you just said. So, I'm just curious about how you maintain really good connection with your employees and your coworkers, your colleagues, everybody, with all of the interesting distancing we have these days and all of the seeming barriers. Like, how do you maintain that ability to keep connected and connecting?
Well, I had the luxury of working for WebEx in 2005 to 2007.
Hmm.
So even in the office, we were using WebEx to do a broadcast to the whole office, right? The VP might be in a corner office, and we've got 2 floors in Phoenix, Arizona. We've got a floor in Sacramento. And we were one of the first at the time to roll out video, like in a Zoom meeting, right? And so that opened my eyes to what's
Mm.
possible. When I'm sitting next to Rick Johnson in a cubicle next to me, and we're both on the same web meeting being broadcast from a guy down the hall, I was like, oh, this is how it works. This means you could live in Hawaii or anywhere else you want to live. So
Mhm.
that's what actually gave me permission when I was, I'll call it air quotes permission, in '07. I moved to San Francisco. I wanted to explore the world. I moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. We moved to North Carolina. We just moved all over the place because you can you can do these meetings and connect in a real meaningful way
Right.
I think of it as even better than being in person, because here I could go to a screen share, or I could have notes and you wouldn't even know it that I'm reading on the side of my screen. There's
Mhm.
so many business values of being able to talk through the computer, equal or better than if you were in person.
Hmm. So,
You're not buying that one.
well, actually, here's what I'm thinking about. I interviewed a woman who actually is in San Francisco, and one of the things she said about video meetings is that she's very short, and how when she was out in the corporate world, she wasn't really taken seriously because of her height. And I
Mm.
laugh because I'm
Mm.
4'11" too, and I've been elbowed by more people putting their hands on their hips in networking meetings than I'd care to know about. But I don't know that I've ever really had exactly that same experience. So I was just thinking about that equalizing effect
Mm.
of that from when you were speaking, as the equalizing effect of, if it's all on video, then those kinds of things of height or differences in some ways aren't necessarily going to even subconsciously play in, because you can't tell that we're different heights.
That's perfect. You're 100% right. My first job, the reason I was fired, looking back, was because of me.
But what'd you
Because
do?
when I would sit down with someone, if I'm looking you in the eyes, I
Mhm.
really had a problem with it. Whatever it was, I was subconscious of, should I look at your nose? Should I look at your ear? And there was
Oh.
just a problem. And so my thought process wouldn't work properly. So all the learning that I did, it took me a few years to get through that. By the time I went to FedEx and went to Memphis for a 3-week training program, I've still got, number one in the class, essential selling skills. We did it on video camera. We did face to face. By then I had put in my unconscious competence, understanding and knowledge of the selling. And so now I could focus on, okay, let me talk to you like a normal person. But I really had to get out of my own way with that. And I found when I was on a web meeting, all that's gone, and nobody knew it on the other side. It's crazy.
So that's like a really neat secondary gain of video, because a lot of times when people say connection is, I miss human connection, which we all need it anyway too, but it makes it so that we can have more of a equal connection with different people. Like, we wouldn't know each other if it wasn't for electronics and video meetings. And
Right.
I'm glad I met you. Like, I'm like,
Right.
cool, I have a new person I know. That's
Now
really
let me
fun.
let me share a hack with you that I learned a year and a half ago, and I've now probably 200 conversations deep into this hack,
What is it?
and it works about 98% of the time.
Uh-huh.
So traditionally, I've lived on the surface, right? When I meet someone, oh, hey, what's the weather like? Or, oh, where'd you go to school? Oh, you're like when we talked, oh, you're a
Mhm.
pastor. Where were you a pastor? This simple exercise I saw done by a guy named Rich Litvin. He lives in Los Angeles, and he did this event called the Litvin Intensive. And it was 4 days, and it's a room full of life coaches. And I was like, huh. I got invited with the golden ticket. So I was a prospect to one of the coaches who was in the room. And I'm like, yeah, I'm into adventure. So let's go. Well, he starts getting people to stand up, and he had a microphone, and it would say, Dianne, how would you like to be coached by me? And people were like, wow, yeah, I want to be coached, and they'd stand up, and they'd start out kind of timid and say, well, I'm just getting into coaching, and I really don't have any clients yet. Okay, and cool, got it. So that's the business problem or whatever, life
Right.
problem. Take me back to when you were in college. What was your passion like then? Right. So, in fact, we could play this out because then it'll be interesting for your audience. We'll flip the script here. So, what
What
was your
fun.
major, or what did you do in college?
Undergraduate or graduate?
Let's talk about both. What was graduate first? We'll
My
go from
graduate
how it
degree
felt
is
there.
in rehab counseling,
Got it.
rehabilitation counseling. And then my undergraduate studies were in psychology with a minor in chemistry. And I've also
Wow.
studied theology and divinity and natural health.
That's amazing. Wow. I just did a walk this morning with a guy who was complete alcoholic. had challenges with his dad that we'll leave in the box. Suffice it to say, it was highly disruptive to him as a kid. It led to him chasing drugs and alcohol to the point where he got a call from a gentleman that's a friend of his one day, and he had his suicide note out on the table. He was ready to call it a day. And he got a call, and the call said, "Hey, Tony, I'm coming to your house today. I just felt like there was a tap on my shoulder and I need to show up in your life. Let's meet."
So here I
Okay,
am.
come on over. So he puts away all the gear and the note and everything else. And he shows up at the house, and they talk for an hour and a half. "Hey, you're amazing. You know, I've noticed though you're a little bit drinking a little more than usual and maybe into some other stuff." 2 minutes after that guy leaves, the pastor calls. "Hey, I want to come to your house." And he was like, there's no other definition or no other reason why this would have happened if it wasn't from the creator. Like, pawn in the game, here you go. And so now he's going to write a show called Flip the Switch. Because for him, it's either a 0 or a 1. There's no gray area.
Right.
You either drink or you don't drink.
Right.
And he's made the decision. He has to make the decision every single day for that. Right. Okay, so we've gone to graduate school and then college, undergrad. Now this is where it gets interesting, right? Now think back to when some of your first memories. Usually the age 6 is what Rich would use. So think when you were 6. What were you passionate about? Like, what really lit you up when you were 6?
Sailing.
Where?
In Sarasota. We lived in Sarasota, Florida, and my parents, they met sailing. So I was just born into it. And by the time I was 6, I'd won my first race. I love, love, love sailing. Like, wow. I live to be on a sailboat pretty much.
Oh, that is so cool. So do you have a sailboat or do you rent sailboats nowadays?
I don't own one now. I sail for other people. I'm a member of Davis Island Yacht Club, and we're the sailingest club in the South. There's tons of boats there, so I sail with other people now.
Got it. Wow. That's really cool. So how does sailing relate to your undergrad and your postgrad?
Well,
or does it?
Lots of different ways. Tons of different ways, mostly because I really believe in living emotionally and spiritually and mentally like aligned and having like an equilibrium. And so sailing is the second most dangerous sport in the world. So it takes a lot of physical ability. It takes a lot of mental ability. It's like a moving chess match. You have to understand sail camber, hydrodynamics, boats, strategy, all that. And it's spiritual to me. I wouldn't have called it spiritual back then, but it is. And that being one with nature and being really connected. And I've always been fascinated by the human mind and how we think and how we figure and what we do. And every time I'd have a party in high school or college, I'd be up in my room pretty much counseling everybody before I even knew it was a counseling thing while the party was going on, because Dianne, I need to talk to you. So it just kind of all naturally came together.
That's really neat. So what I can see, I think of it now, this isn't a Rich thing, this is a Chad thing. I think of it like there's a string or a rope and you just snap it and you go, okay, here's life when I was 6 and here's what I'm doing now. And what's interesting is most of the time, people are living in the lane that they're meant to live, that God created them to do. Occasionally, people are living outside of the line. And it could be by 1 degree. And if it's 1 degree out, it could feel like so much friction, even though you're just like 1 inch away from gold. You're digging for gold in the ground. You're like, oh, I could just give up. And 1 more inch and you would have been there. Or 12 more inches is in the book, I think. So what it took for me was when Rich did that exercise with multiple people throughout the weekend. There was a woman from the UN who said, I've never coached anyone before. And he would pull out, this is hilarious. He pulled out a TV remote. He goes, pause. And then he could talk about the person in front of the other 150 coaches without actually making them feel bad. Because he's like, okay, I'm going to do this from time to time throughout the weekend. Pause. He goes, this woman and she's, I think, also maybe 4'11" or something. This woman here, she works for the UN. She not only coaches individuals, She coaches presidents of countries for more than 2 decades. She's saved tens of thousands of people's lives, diverted trillions of dollars in funds,
Right.
and she's trying to right now enroll you in the fact that she's never coached anyone. Unpause. Right? And you're like,
perspective.
wow.
Yep.
Perspective. So you see this time and time and time again. Another woman, oh man, she was in my small group at the breakouts at the tables. She is a chief. I don't want to get the word wrong. It's not a chief executive assistant. It's a chief administrator, like a big wig role at a big telco.
Mm-hmm.
It's one you would know about.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the chairman's and CEO's right-hand gal.
Right.
And so she is so buttoned up, and she was interviewing for a position to help women in leadership. Right. And it was a noble cause. And she's there. And by the last day, she's like, I haven't gotten what I needed to get out of this. I have a presentation that's due tomorrow. And I'm in front of all these people, and it's 10 other women are going for this spot. I need this. And so the people get her to stand up, right? So she stands up, and he's like, so how important is this? And all this. She had told this story in her head that tomorrow was the day, make or break. Well, she'd already gotten into the program. She was one of 10. By the time he unraveled the story, then he goes, take me back to when you were a kid. What'd you like to do? And she just gets the chills, and she goes, I really, really loved helping my mother set the table and making everything perfect for the guests, because we would have guests at our house a lot, all the time. And it was fabulous just to see the plates. And I was the person that was just like helping my mom and dad make that a special moment for all these people. Mm-hmm. And so by her realizing, so Rich said, why don't you, when you go do the interview, instead of all this stuff about, why don't you just be vulnerable and share that story? When I was a kid, and I remember when I was first memories I had,
right,
I would set the table, and you know how it is, the salad fork and the big fork and the little fork and the knife. I loved that, and he talks her through this, and she flipped the bottle of champagne unpopped, and she had her life moment to realize I am perfectly in my lane, and it's perfectly okay for me to be outward about this and not be afraid of it.
Right.
Okay. So now you see this time and time again. At 4 a.m. I wake up, and I didn't do the stand up, let's do this in public with 150 people. I did it in private.
Right.
So for me, I just kind of teared up in the hotel room, and I was like, did my dad really love me as a kid? Because he didn't go to the soccer games or the swim meets or the lacrosse games. Mom did. So I was 100% positive mom loved me. But I always had this question mark. And then he never really said it to me physically, never really gave you a hug. Now, my sister comes along, born 12 years after me, roughly, said, I love you to my sister all the time, gave her a hug all the time. And so now I'm this teenager kid going, wait a second. You say it to her, maybe I'm not recognized. What am I, chopped liver? So then through life, if you fast forward the tape and you see a lot of the things that I did were to try to gain favor with my dad.
Yes.
Right. And so that was the unpopping of the cork that third night of the 4 days at 4 a.m. in the morning. Right. I went in and I was just like, this is magic. What we just learned and experienced. And then I was able to do that with another guy who's sitting next to me on the couch, goes, man, I don't know if I got what I needed out of this. And I walked him through the same exact exercise. And he was a police officer turned life coach. And he was like, I don't know if I'm ready for it. And I just walked him through the same episode, and he was like, boom, the cork popped for him.
Right. Exactly. So how did you take your lesson that you learned about with the thing from your dad, and you're a father? How have you taken that message, that lesson, and incorporated it into your family and your relationships?
That's a really good one. when I first came home, my plan was to go right from the airport to talk to my dad first.
Right, of
which
course.
it ended up taking 6 weeks for me to have that conversation. And I didn't think it would.
Right.
Who did I end up talking it through for 4 pages of notes?
Sure.
My daughter, she was 16 at the time. And so I actually shared my story with my daughter. Mm-hmm. And it was the first person on the planet Earth that I'd have ever shared it with.
Wow.
And so I just teared up and I was like, wow. And I said, I need to share this with my dad. And we had a connection moment because she's like, oh, you're just a person too.
You're right. Right.
And so I think that helped to sort of expose that. Then I shared it with my wife and then I shared it with my son, all in different moments that was really a bonding kind of a conversation. It was so amazing.
And so how did that vulnerability change your relationships, or did it? Like, you took the risk, which is huge.
Yeah.
And so how did the trajectory of the relationship shift, or did they?
It did. It definitely did. Especially in the short term, like an amazing level of connectivity. Mm-hmm. As I hired mindset experts and a financial expert, I have about 9 coaches for my business that I've hired in the last year and a half since that event.
Right.
Or maybe 2 years. And so I feel like I'm up-leveling my mindset every day. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because with my wife, she doesn't have the luxury of having 9 mindset coaches that help you break the next level of barriers. So there's a book I read from, I think his name is Gay Hendricks, and it's a picture of a fishbowl, a small fishbowl jumping into a big fishbowl.
Right.
And it talks about the temperature being at a certain level, maybe let's say it's 71 degrees. And you start moving it up or down or however you look at it and just changing, right, to a new level of success.
Right.
And your normal mindset would be to want to pull it back to where you are, the same level of success. Like, I'm in this box, I make this much per year. The forces of nature and of your family and of your own mindset, it's mostly right here in between your 2 ears, it turns out, tend to pull you back. And I've felt that because I haven't invested the cycles in bringing my wife along in those same levels of conversation, it tends to want to pull us back to the 71 degrees.
Right.
And yet I'm pot committed to figuring out how do we both get to that new level of exceptionalism.
Right. And that's kind of where the art and the science of it all is, because there's a lot of science behind understanding. And then there's that creative art piece, is how are we going to do it? How are we going to navigate to keep expanding? Because I always tell everybody the universe is always expanding, and unity, diversity, and complexity. So if we're not willing to continue to expand, at the end result, even if we stay at that same 71 degrees, we're actually going backwards.
Yeah, that's good.
Because we're always meant to be expanding. So even though our mission might be the same thing all our life, the iteration's going to shift over time. Like, because when people tell me I'm reinventing myself, I'm like, well, you can't reinvent what's already been invented. That makes no sense. You might reinvent how you express your authentic inner self, but that's not a reinvention. That's a different iteration. And people look at me like I'm a little goofy sometimes, but I think it's important to realize that, like, we were all created perfect, whole, and complete. We're fully equipped to do everything that we're meant to do. Like you said, the only issue is right here, and whatever we believe or don't believe, or consciously and unconsciously,
The thing that really helped me, I was in a coaching session with a guy named Townsend Wardlaw, and I've known him for 8 or 9 years. Mm-hmm. And he'll just pop by the office when I had a physical office in downtown Denver once a quarter. Hey, how you doing? Just checking in. And he would help me get over the hurdle of, why are you inside the 4 walls working for a company? Because he knows me. You need to be an entrepreneur. That's what you're meant to do.
Right.
Like, I don't like politics. I like to break the rules. I had a mohawk when I was 17 years old.
So you're a rebel, and So it's time to be that rebel.
Yeah, it was totally time to be the rebel. So he had a session with me maybe again a year and a half ago. A lot goes back to a year and a half ago, I think, when I cracked the code with my dad and then had the talk with him
Right.
and realized. Then my mom and dad both came back and we broke down crying that night. And then my mom came back, goes, actually, here's a picture. Here's him on the sidelines at this fun and this. You tell your own story. So sure, he's a radiologist. He was working on weekends a lot of times. And we lived in a nice house and had a nice car as a direct result of that. So it wasn't the not love you thing. That was a made up story in my head. It was
Right.
how he showed it was the piece that could have been improved. And
Right.
now guess what? He overdoes it too much
Well,
now.
but that back then he was following the belief systems that he was taught in his generation, his time frame was to provide for everybody, and that is love. And nobody had the awareness that us, the kids, were taking it in different ways because the brain
Right.
makes up a story to fill in the unknown,
Right.
even if it's not true.
Right.
Yeah.
So I can't stress enough the importance of go back to your childhood when you were 6. It could have been traumatic. Mine was not abusive. Mine was not a bad thing. My dad's a radiologist. We live in a nice house. And yet I still had some level of mental trauma, if you will, that caused me. Now, guess what? Looking back, that was a spark that lit a lot of my business and sales career and gave me superpower strengths because I fought through it all and I needed to prove to my dad, oh, he told me one year how much money he made. And he goes, you're not allowed to tell anyone this because this is kind of like under NDA. I was like, okay, sure. And I looked at it as, you're not going to be as successful as me. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're a doctor. I can be as successful as you. So I started to go the path of the doctor. And I was like, whoa, that's way too much memorization. I was smart enough to do it, but I was way too bored to be able to do that kind of thing. Chemistry, physics. Finally, I moved over to business. And then the business law book was big too. And I was like, oh, I'm doomed. Memorization. This is terrible. But then you find your lane. And once you find your lane, then it's just put the raft in the river and go down and enjoy the pictures all the way down. Right now I'm living in frictionless world. It's awesome.
It's awesome. So how did you make the jump? What happened that you actually made the jump? Like, was it a little jump or did you just go all in or how did that work?
The all in was interesting. December 11th, 2019, just pre-pandemic. I was in New York City. And I was a little stressed because in March of 2019, I had a bad month and it caused a ripple where I was like, oh, finances and stress. And how do I'm responsible for people now. What do I do with this? And so I did my presentation on the last day of it. It's always the last day with these events. What's that all about?
There's a theme going on here.
There's a theme here. Yeah. He did say, raise your hands if you want to be coached by me. And I'm like, I didn't know what it was at the Rich Littman one. And then he goes, okay, pause. And there's some people like alligator arms and some people with this. And he goes, okay, that's how you live your life. So it is an eye-opening moment. That is how I live my life, apparently. A little bit conservative in that area. So anyway, I'm in New York City and Jeff Hazlett is the former CMO of Eastman Kodak. And he runs a group called the C-Suite Network. And there's this woman named Julie Juju Christopher, who seems to be almost angelic to me, prophetic, to the point where you're like, is that okay? Or am I not supposed to be following a prophet and, fortune telling and all this kind of stuff? But I go through my story for 30 to 45 minutes and I'm like, I just get the, butterflies in my stomach around finances and blah, blah, blah. And so all these 50, 60 CEOs go around the room. They're like, can I give some advice? And they're all dumping it on me. They're like, yeah, those butterflies, they'll never go away. If you don't have them a little bit, then you're doing something wrong. You should all, and I'm like, oh, okay. Finally, Juju stands up and she goes, she's this from France, or she's just got this look about her. She used to play instrument check. She still does. She plays instruments very, very well. And she just stands up and she's got this French accent. She just claps her hands and stopped the moment. She goes, here's the thing, Chad, what you've just shared with you need to make a decision. And here's the hole in the universe right now. You either need to walk forward and decide you want to be a CEO, or you need to stay back in 2019 and be a salesperson for the rest of your life. And I'm drawn like a magnet. I'm like, okay. And I just walked 3-4 steps forward. I felt like I went through the hole and I was like, okay. And that was the final flipping moment for me.
Yes.
That it just happened. Right. And
Yes.
then we
Oh, I
all
feel it.
closed with a prayer. There was another woman, Holly from Denver, who turns out to be a former pastor, and she does mindset training. And she stood up and she goes, normally we don't bring in prayer to these kinds of environments, but at the risk of this group, I felt like we've made a bond over the last 4 days. Can we just hold hands and say a prayer? And she said, okay, what's the one word that describes what you've gotten out of the last 4 days? What are you going to take forward? And now I have to think back. What was my word? I think it was, clarity was my word.
Ooh, good one.
I was like, I just want the lights on in the dark room and I'm looking for clarity. And the rest is history. I mean, now we're planning on, we may go buy a $10 million house in Beaver Creek and fund it by having executives out to help them transform their lives and have coaches come in. We're writing a book. And now the friction's gone. A year ago, I would have said, $10 million house, you must be joking. And my family would have said, you're crazy. And nowadays I can tell my family things and then they see it actually happen. And they're like, oh, wow, you're a different kind of person.
Yeah. Well, mindset and then the willingness to take the risk. Like when you said make a decision, that word means to cut out all other possibilities. So once we truly decide, all other possibilities are now out the window. That's the one choice. And so by doing that, you were able to get in alignment with what you knew you wanted anyway.
Yes. So now my son went to college. He's happy as a clam, and he's aligned, by the way. He's going to be an engineer. So we had him do some of the online tests that say, where is it frictionless for you? And so if you haven't done that and you're listening to the show, I highly encourage. There's so many. Wealth Dynamics is one that I went in. I think I paid half price. I had a discount code. So if you need a discount code, email me and I'll figure out what it is, but it's half off. So it's $100 thing for $50. And it told me that I'm a creator first and a mechanic second, because I build stuff. Now mechanic isn't my passion, right? My son would be flip. He'd be the mechanic,
right?
Because he loves to be an engineer and he needs things very clearly defined, A, then B, then C, right? So I just talked to him today and we were building out the plan for the cruise ship. We just booked a cruise in July of next year. We figured that's plenty of time to let everything go away and everybody will be healthy by then. And so I was like, hey, what do you want to do as far as the events? And I said, definitely we want to fish and catch a can. It's like, yes, good. I'm good with that. And then I said, he goes, I'm not really too concerned. Well, I know that's incorrect because he needs everything defined.
He likes to have it planned.
So I said, so are you saying it'd be okay if I just went and checked them off for you? He's like, oh, no. I definitely want to be part of the decision process. I was like, okay, cool. Got it. Right. But he doesn't want to just go on the ship and then hear from people and then decide where to go. So it's so important, whether you're 45, 75, or 10, if you haven't done the skills assessment to figure out what is a frictionless life for you, there's so many of these, you should do it, whether it's Wealth Dynamics or free ones or whatever.
Right. I mean, I've done a ton of them and I keep doing all the different assessments here and there. And I work with people who are really highly sensitive, who are mostly entrepreneurs and mostly musicians, but there's that common thread of being a visionary and seeing things a little but yet there's the processing piece. Like some people don't care about all those things. Other people have to do it themselves. There's all the different things. And so part of being effective, I think, and successful is knowing our own personal way and then honoring that, like not trying to make ourselves be something we're not.
Yes, right. And you can do that, make yourself be something you're not, if you tell a story from your childhood. I think that's why, if you say, go back to 6, take out before you met your pastor, your parents, before you've really had any stamp on you of what the world is, what were you passionate about? And that's
Right.
why when I ask you about you're it's easy. You're like, oh, a boat. And here's why. And I couldn't immediately connect the dots, but you have, between the boating and chemistry and balance. It's yin and yang. When I see the balance in Star Wars, in fact, in my bookcase, I've got Darth Vader on one side and Luke on the other.
Yes.
And it's like, it's a yin and a yang and a good and an evil. And man, this year is one of those heat ups. The battle is on between for our souls, is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, it's much deeper than people realize, I think.
Yes. I mean, with the Middle East treaty thing that's going on, I heard someone speak at a church recently and he was like, you don't understand. Like, this is 80 years of getting to this point to where Israel and the US are tied at the hip. Now, there's other powers and forces that would say, oh no, that's not a good thing in the balance. But it's biblical, and it's one more step towards the glory of God, which is end of days. Could be tomorrow. It could be in 500 million years. No one knows. But as long as you have the belief and understanding that that's all good on the other side of the hill, then you don't worry about what's going on today.
Have fun today. So,
Have fun.
how do you personally bring together the whole art and science thing, like the technical piece of your work, but you're also visionary, or you wouldn't be running a company that's on the forward edge of technology, right? So that's by definition. So with your teams and even within yourself, how do you marry those two things? How do you reconcile the art creative vision, Chad, and the scientific, I understand the rules, businessman?
It's
Chad?
the creator and the mechanic is what it is.
Yes.
Because I'm not passionate about the operations side. And yet I've learned how to do it and I'm good at it, or even you could say great. It's just not a passion.
Right.
So the way that I've built that as my secondary trait of a positive skill set, and the reason I'm creator and mechanic, which, by the way, 80% of all the people in the room at the latest retreat that we went to, of all these CEOs and founders, creator mechanic. Maybe there was one other thing that jumped ahead of mechanic, but what I do, I remember seeing, in fact, I've got the glass of water right here. I remember seeing this 30-minute show, and I think it might have been in black and white, a really grainy color. And the big rocks, have you heard of the big rocks situation?
Yes.
Or exercise?
Yeah.
So, hey, here's the rock called health. Here's the rock called happiness. Here's the rock. And so to me, if you put it in business terms, here's the rock called creativeness. Here's the rock called operations, making sure the customer's happy, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
If you were to fill the glass with stuff that comes at you and just pour it full of sand, it would fill up to like 3/4. And then you try to put in the priorities, and there's no way you could jam them into the top of the glass. But if you put the priorities in first and you block out your calendar, that's the big rock. You just say, hey, for 2 hours, this is my big rock. Whether it's playing golf, maybe that's important to you. Maybe it's practicing your craft. If you're a guitar player, you need to spend 2 hours a day on it. Occasionally, look, I've got a big rock and it gets bitten into sometimes. That's okay. It's a rounding error. On the whole, if it's 90% of the time that I'm focusing on the big rocks, that's how you do it. Put those in the glass first. And then when life comes at you with all of the demands, hey, I need you to help me with this carpet repair job. I know you're a musician and I know you do carpet on this. I know a bass player who's a top bass player for a metal band.
Right.
And he does carpet laying on the weekends. Pretty normal thing, I think. So it'd be real easy for him to go, oh man, I've got this job for 14 days and I can make $8,000 or $4,000. Or I can go play on the tour in Europe and I know I'm not going to make quite as much as that. Well, how do you balance that? And you just have to have those priorities in your job and in your life.
Right. And blocking it off, and it's kind of like dedicated and protected.
Mm-hmm.
And so that only something that's really urgent gets in the way, right? So that we're committed to it, that's what we're doing. Yeah.
I'm doing a new one now. And I mentioned this to you, I believe, when we had the pre-call. It's called 75 Hard. I thought it was 75 Strong. I don't know why it's called 75 Hard. It just is. And it's an app on your phone. And what it means is I did a run 3 days ago, and I've seen 3 people tell me, oh, you should check out this app and sign up and do it. So I'm on the run. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. I didn't even read the rules and instructions. I just said, okay, you told me 3 times, I'm not going to not follow your lead. And so I was like, okay, I'm doing it. So right. I was like, okay, I'm not going to, I don't think I could die from this, but it's pretty intense. First workout, 45 minutes. Second workout, same day, another 45 minutes. Then you take a progress picture of the progress. This is a 75-day routine, and I'm on day 3. 10 pages of reading. So before midnight, I have to read 10 pages in a book. So that's 750 pages of reading I'll do in 75 days. Mm-hmm. When you chunk it down to the ridiculous, it's not really that hard. I drink 1 gallon of water a day and then follow a diet that I come up with. So that's nice because I can make up what
you come up with. There you go.
The yin and the yang of this, I think, are going to balance themselves out, because if you're working out for 45 minutes times 2, then I could eat a candy bar and it'll be consumed by the workout. And then no cheat on meals and no alcohol for 75 days. So as a result of this, the way they sell it is self-perception, self-worth. There's so many values to this and things that you learn about yourself that, just in the first 3 days, I'm like, oh, wow, okay, got it. That's a good one. But by following a routine, just like the big rocks, when it comes to putting placeholders on your calendar, following a routine like this, whether it's working out or practicing for a musical instrument or whatever, you just have to commit to it and follow through and do it. Make the decision, flip the switch.
Right. Making the decision. That's key. That's extremely important. So what do you do for fun?
I'm a big skier. To me, skiing is my sailboating. I can be on the mountain. Yeah, snow ski. My son snowboards. I ski. I went to a place called Maple Summit in February of this year, and it was 48 CEOs, and just it's a workout and it's great for the mind all in one. And so to me, when I'm listening to my music and just arms out sometimes, or I'm going down the bumps, the feeling of just not a care in the world is just amazing.
Oh, that sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
I've never been snow skiing, and everybody tells me I'd be really good at it since I have a low center of gravity and very strong legs and good balance. So maybe I'll try that someday.
I mean, these days with the really fat skis, it's just you push a little and it turns. In the past, it was like dragging along 2 big planks. Nowadays, it's gotten 90% more efficient than it used to be when I was younger.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So much fun.
Oh, that's really fun. So have you ever had trouble in your life with procrastination? And if you have, how have you dealt with it?
I've been pretty good at prioritization and getting the job done. Like I said, the big rocks is the key. You put it on your calendar and it just gets done. Now there's certain things, there's if you draw the quadrant and you say urgent and important is upper right, urgent and not important is left, and then important, not urgent, that's the hardest quadrant to go after, the important and not urgent. Because you know you need to do it, but that workout can wait till tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so that's that's a fine balance of keeping the urgent, not important quadrant in sight, because that's the only way you can build the blueprint for your life. Otherwise, you're just following and you're always chasing. You have to have the blueprint. TK Cater was my mentor for about a year there, and he was I'm looking for a picture, but I don't see it. He was the former he was the CEO of a company called Toutapp, which was a tech company that went from 100 employees down to 10 or 12. And you would think, oh, well, that's terrible. And he was the number one company in this space. And then they got bought by a company called Marketo. And he became head of strategy for Marketo. Then he helped architect the sale of Marketo to Adobe for multiple billions of dollars. And he made millions of dollars in the process. And he went from being overweight to running head of strategy and being in very good shape mentally and physically over a 10-year period. Started a company, sold it again, made millions of dollars. And it's as simple as, what did I do last week? And what am I going to do next week?
Right. Yep.
And when you celebrate the week before, and you're like, wow, I did a lot. I sold a $5,000 deal, and I went to the retreat in the mountains, and I came up with a book, and blah, blah, blah. If you list that in a Google Doc, and then here's the 3 things I'm going to do next week that help me get to whatever that goal is, you'll find that each 52 of those, you're going to be 52 steps ahead of most other people in the country.
Right. Yeah, especially because it'll be focused.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing you say, and I want to make sure that I've got this down correctly, that personal development and self-care are essential to being successful. If we're not always growing, we're not putting ourselves in those growth, personal development kinds of situations, then success will elude us in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so important, because I see people a lot think they can just jump on the success wagon or figure it out, but they're not doing all the other things about taking care of themselves and learning and being open and teachable. I mean, you've demonstrated in this interview so far a small piece of how open and receptive you are to learning from others, learning things, and then trying them out and implementing them and seeing how it all comes together in the puzzle of your life, which makes you an effective business owner. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I think it's very important. I've interviewed lots of people on this podcast, and I had this one attorney one time shortly after I started. And he's a lemon law attorney and really cool guy. And I'm thinking, I wonder what I'm going to talk to a lemon law attorney about, like visionary wise. Like, I wonder where this is going to go. And then near the end of the show, he just started talking about the importance of his own personal development, and he wouldn't be where he was without personal development. And so, but he didn't present like he was going to talk about that. And it wasn't in his bio or anything. He just started talking about that was real to him, that he had to keep growing and being open, or he would never be in the position he is in. And that's what you are saying.
Yeah. And I would couple it with one other thing. My grandfather sent me a note when I was in 8th grade at the same time that he gave me this. So it was plus or minus 6 months or so.
Okay.
And it was the 10 tips to live like a fulfilled life. And I still have it in handwriting. And, number 1, the Lord your God above anything else. Right. Number 2, love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
And then number 3, health, physical and mental. And he wrote a story under each of those headers, how one guy in their neighborhood when he was younger was like the guy in school, and then went off and just slipped his way into drugs and alcohol, and then became like a clown and just didn't make it in life. And it's so easy that yin and yang falls out of balance, that I think that's why your sailboat analogy is so on point. And so for anybody who has their own analogy, for me, it's Star Wars, Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker. How do I keep that in balance? I've always told my wife, if I ever got to a point where like alcohol impacted my ability to be a good husband or my job or career, Because I like having 2 or 3 glasses of wine. I'll have 3 and Tracy will have 1. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
and what's the tipping point where you go, oh, wow, that's now a dependency. And you don't know it when you're in it. And
Right.
now my perspective on alcohol is really there's not a huge ROI. There is, I say there is no ROI.
There is no ROI.
There really is no ROI. And it's like, wow. That maybe there was when I was 21 years old and I wanted to meet a girl and I had inhibitions I had to get around.
Right.
Yeah, okay, maybe there was a 1 or 2 year period where that may have been a positive thing, but it probably is actually negative because it develops you in an area that you shouldn't be developing in.
Correct.
Right.
That's correct. You got it.
Right?
That I agree totally. And I've interviewed a lot of people who said, I looked at it and alcohol was not serving where I wanted to go, and I just stopped.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because they were alcoholic or they were in trouble, but they assessed the situation and where they wanted to go and what was happening. And they decided that there was no ROI on that piece. And so it was actually in the way.
And so my point of that last piece is back to what we started, the your will be done piece.
Mm-hmm.
I found that when I handed the keys over to the car, so to speak, I still have my hand on the wheel sometimes. But as much as I try to say, you know what, when you put me in the frictionless path,
Mm-hmm.
who do you want in my life? Who should show up? And then when I do that, it's like Rich Blakeman, the former SVP from Miller Hyman, the #1 sales training organization in the world. He calls and he's like, hey, I'm looking for a position. Do you know anybody in town hiring? I'm like, well, I'm not, but I should be. Let's have you over to the fire pit. We talked 3 hours about God and 1 hour about the job. And we aligned on a belief system first. And then it was like, man, you're the best salesman probably in the world. And now me and him are aligned. And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't say, hand it over.
Right.
That's the key to me.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the key. So I have one last question for you. But before I ask that question, I want to know if there's anything that's on your heart that you wanted to share that you haven't yet, that I haven't asked you or didn't come up, but you really want to make sure.
Once I posted on LinkedIn 5 or 6 years ago, and I said, hey, if you need to talk, my phone's available. And I would talk to anybody, anytime about anything. And one person reached out and took me up on the offer. And he was about to be kicked out of his house. He was about to become homeless. He had 3 kids. And we talked for an hour. And then I introduced him to some people. And then fast forward a year later, I gave him the your will be done prayer. And I just said, look, dude, you're trying to fight it too hard. Just give it away. Like, give it to God and ask him, what do you want? Like, I'll do anything you need. And so he was into alcohol. He stopped drinking. A year later, he was a director of a group with a team of 2 or 3 people. And he was like, man, I got to tell you, that talk saved my life. Mm-hmm. So that would be that's what's on my heart here, is that if somebody hears it, whether they're in another country or whatever, if they said, this guy just kind of struck a nerve, maybe if I talk to him for 30 minutes, maybe I could get out of the dark and into the light.
Right.
That would be my offer. No strings attached. I would just be happy to have the conversation.
Oh, that would be wonderful. We'll make sure all of your contact information is in the show notes. But that is really huge, because sometimes just hearing from another person who gets it makes all the difference in the world. And the show is called Someone Gets Me for a reason. So you have the ability to get people. And that is a beautiful thing. Thank you for offering that. That's really kind. So your last question is, if there was a billboard that we were going to put up in the world that is going to have your name as the quote on it, what would our quote be for the whole world to see from Chad Burmeister?
I keep talking about your will be done, and that's hard for me to get away from because it's so powerful for me right now. How about the billboard says, your will was done? Because if I fast forward the tape, then did I do everything in my power to do the right thing for people?
Right.
And for my grandfather, he made a big impact on me. Harold
Yes.
Schilling was a HR person at Mobile Oil. And he cared about his people. And he was like, I think he said he never fired anyone, but that was probably, that'd be an exaggeration. But he was just such a caring and gentle person. And he
Mhm.
always carried God on his sleeve wherever he went.
Mhm.
And I'm at the point in my life and career at age 47 to go, you know what? I'm only on the first 9 holes of golf. We're about to go to the back nine and we're at the turn. Okay, now it's time to live in the lane that I was called to live in.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. So if you're listening to Chad and you're going, wow, there's something I need to know more, I need to learn more, I just want to connect with him. He just offered. So hunt him down and connect with him. And if you're listening and you had some of those questions or like, what? Listen to him again. He said so many wise things that I think really had to do with the art and science of being successful and how it all comes together. And in my world, it's the spiritual piece that bring them together and bridge it. And that's what I'm hearing Chad say as well. So try it all on and see how it works for you. Thank you for being on the show, Chad.
Thank you for having me, Diane. Amazing.
Now remember, everybody, to keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you because you're a rock star and you're here on purpose with a purpose. So go out there and live your life with that light from within you shining brightly. And until the next episode of Someone Gets Me, be well.